have everything. Those 4 words, brief, blunt, and somehow both conciliatory and provocative, are the kind of line that can change how a room looks when it's said out loud. They have already begun to change how the world imagines a meeting in Miami this December, the Group of 20 Leaders Summit that, by tradition, brings together the heads of the world's largest economies to talk trade, climate, security, and the rough management of a fragile global order. What's new and what has set off a cascade of questions among diplomats, capitals, and security teams is this. The United States has confirmed it intends to invite every member of the G20 to the summit, which by definition includes the Russian president. A senior U.S. official told reporters that no formal invitations have been issued at this time, but Russia is a G20 member and will be invited to attend ministerial meetings and the leaders' summit. That statement, short and bureaucratic in tone, is seismic in consequence. It places Vladimir Putin, a leader who has been at the center of Western sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and criminal investigations, squarely on a guest list for one of the most visible stages in international diplomacy and on American soil. It forces allies who have long embraced a strategy of deterrence and exclusion to confront a reality the White House appears to be willing to normalize: Russia at the table alongside the United States. President Donald Trump's own words threaded through the immediate reaction, softening and sharpening the claim at once. When pressed, he said no, but if he came, it would be probably very helpful. He added a longer memory of past decisions, saying that they threw Russia out before my time. That was Obama and a certain prime minister from a place called Canada, Trudeau, and argued that removing Russia from the G8 was a mistake. Those lines have fed 2 competing narratives, one that sees re-engagement as pragmatic and potentially useful, and another that sees it as a reversal of the Western isolation imposed in response to Russian actions in Ukraine. For anyone who tracks this conflict, one fact remains unavoidable: Vladimir Putin is not a neutral figure on the international stage. He carries with him not only the authority of the Kremlin, but also the legal and moral consequences of Russia's conduct in Ukraine. In March 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Mr. Putin, a rare move against a sitting head of state, charging him with responsibility for the unlawful deportation and transfer of children from Ukraine. That warrant continues to complicate any plan for world leaders to meet him on territory that respects its jurisdiction, and it raises hard questions about the legal and security calculus the U.S. will have to manage if the president formally invites or accepts his presence. So what kind of summit might this be? Picture a Miami resort, the place itself selected by the host, with American cameras lining the route, visiting delegations lodged within walking distance of the venue, and security perimeters stretching like a spider web. Now imagine within those perimeters a leader whom much of the Western alliance regards as indicted under international law, whose government remains subject to broad financial sanctions, and whose presence could trigger protests, diplomatic walkouts, or a frozen scripted meeting designed to avoid awkward optics. That is the diplomatic tightrope the United States will be walking if it follows through on the policy of inviting every G20 member and leaving attendance decisions to each capital. There are practical reasons governments sometimes insist on universal invitations. The G20 is, by design, a forum for conversation among the world's major economies. Excluding a member can narrow the conversation and limit the forum's ability to address global problems that require broad buy-in. From that perspective, Washington's stated approach that all members are welcome to attend ministerial meetings and the Leaders' Summit is defensible as a matter of preserving a multilateral platform. But diplomacy operates in more than the abstract. It lives in moments of optics, in hallway encounters and off-the-record exchanges. For many U.S. allies, the presence of Russia's president on U.S. soil will be intolerable unless there are clarifying arrangements about the purpose of any interaction and about consequences for behavior that has already provoked sanctions and international condemnation. What does the Kremlin want? Officially, Moscow's public posture has been cautious. The Kremlin has not always accepted the jurisdiction of institutions like the IC, and its spokespeople routinely dismiss international legal action as politicized. Practically, Moscow will weigh the trip in terms of gain and risk. Would attending the summit allow Mr. Putin to score geopolitical points, or would it expose him to legal or diplomatic hazards? Even if invited, the Russian leader may conclude that the costs outweigh the benefits and choose to send a lower-ranking minister or skip the meeting entirely. President Trump himself expressed skepticism about whether Mr. Putin would come, even as he insisted the presence would be probably very helpful. All of this is happening against a deepening and continuing backdrop, the war in Ukraine, which has reshaped European security, the network of sanctions that Western countries have applied to Moscow, and the broader contest between competing visions of international order. The argument to reinsert Russia into spaces of formal diplomacy is grounded in a long-running debate about engagement versus isolation. Some argue that excluding Russia from major forums left the world talking too much about Russia and not enough to Russia, a point expressed bluntly by the U.S. president when he recalled that G7 meetings often fixated on Moscow. Others answer that Russia's actions, including the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the full-scale invasion in 2022, necessitated a sustained period of punishment and exclusion to deter future aggression and to signal international norms. The choice to invite, then, is not purely operational. It is a judgment about how to best protect those norms. If Mr. Putin were to travel, the summit would become a test case. Would leaders use the encounter to press him on questions of territorial sovereignty, prisoner exchanges, and the return of deported children? Would they seek formal or informal assurances about de-escalation? Or would meetings be carefully managed, choreographed to avoid substantive confrontation, a brief handshake and a pedestal photo, while separate rooms host the real discussions among like-minded partners? Each option carries risks. An overt confrontation on neutral ground could spark a spectacle that dominates the summit's agenda. A superficial optics-first approach would infuriate those who believe the international community must hold Moscow accountable publicly and unequivocally, and a refusal by many leaders to engage with Russia's leader, even if he is physically present, could undercut the very premise of inviting him in the first place. Legal practicalities will matter as well. The ICC arrest warrant complicates travel to countries that are party to the Rome Statute. The United States is not a party to the ICC, which changes the immediate legal calculus for a visit to U.S. Soil arrest would not be an automatic prospect within the United States, but it does not eliminate the political and diplomatic consequences. Allies who recognize the court and enforce its warrants could face domestic pressure to act if Mr. Putin moves within their borders. And beyond court orders, there are sanctions regimes and visa restrictions that could constrain official delegations and wrap any potential bilateral moment in layers of restrictions. Any state that contemplates hosting Mr. Putin must also plan for protest, counter-protest, and the security logistics of transporting a heavily scrutinized head of state through a city with visible American audiences and media attention. There are other angles to consider. An invitation to the G20 will be interpreted as a signal not only to Russia, but to other global actors, to China, watching how the U.S. balances competition and cooperation, to U capitals and NATO partners who will judge whether the U.S. is aligning its summit diplomacy with allied strategy, and to countries that sit uneasily between blocs who will see the move as a test of whether multilateral forums can hold together across sharp geopolitical divides. The Biden-era logic of isolating Moscow after 2022 has already given way to a reality in which parties on all sides keep channels open, back channels, multilateral venues, and informal talks. But hosting the Russian president in America would mark an unmistakable escalation in the willingness to re-embed Moscow into the most prominent diplomatic institutions. At home, the decision to invite every G20 member will generate a political debate about American values and strategic consistency. Supporters will argue that the United States, as host, is obligated to preserve the forum's inclusivity and to maximize opportunities to resolve global problems through dialogue. Critics will say that inviting a leader accused of serious crimes risks normalizing behavior that other institutions have rightly condemned, and that it sends a confusing signal to allies who expect American leadership to be anchored in principle as well as pragmatism. The president's own remarks that excluding Russia was a mistake and that bringing the country back into the fold might have been wiser will be parsed for whether they signal a long-term shift or merely a tactical recalibration. In diplomatic terms, summits are where form and substance often collide. They are excellent at producing photographs and joint communiques, and they are less reliable at producing binding solutions when fundamental interests diverge. The G20 historically has succeeded when leaders align around common economic imperatives, stabilizing markets, coordinating macroeconomic policy, or advancing trade frameworks. It is less effective at resolving entrenched geopolitical conflicts. If the Miami summit draws Mr. Putin, the core question will be whether the meeting is used to advance a narrow, pragmatic agenda where cooperation is possible, or whether it will be consumed by the politics of Russia's presence, overshadowing attempts to make concrete progress on global issues such as supply chains, energy, security, or climate finance. There's also the question of sequencing and contingency. A formal invitation is not an invitation to impunity. Allies and civil society will watch for parallel measures that preserve pressure where pressure is deemed necessary, continued sanctions where violations persist, targeted legal measures where jurisdictions allow them, and clear public statements that reaffirm commitments to international law. A U.S. decision to pursue inclusion at the leaders' level will likely be accompanied by private consultations with allies, not as a courtesy, but as a necessity. After all, the functional value of the G20 depends in part on the willingness of its most influential members to act in concert when commitments are made. There are, finally, reputational stakes that cannot be dismissed. Hosting the world's leaders is as much about demonstrating the host's values as it is about managing logistics. The United States, by inviting every member, is signaling a preference for a certain vision of multilateralism, open, inclusive, and focused on keeping channels intact. That posture has strategic logic. It also invites hard questions. Can a platform that includes a leader like Mr. Putin be more useful than it is dangerous? Will the presence of every major economy produce better outcomes on the issues the world needs solved? Or will it give the impression that entrenched wrongdoing can be accepted if it suits short-term conversations? As the calendar slides toward December, the answers will become clearer. For now, the move by Washington has already performed its diplomatic work. It has reshaped the debate, forced capitals to articulate lines they had perhaps left latent, and put the G20 on the front pages as a potential turning point in the West's relationship with Moscow. Whether this will mark a cautious outreach that leaves accountability intact, or whether it will inaugurate a broader softening of the stance that followed the invasion of Ukraine, depends on decisions to be made in private rooms and public briefings alike. There is one final human observation to make about summits like this. They are not just about geopolitics and legal texts. They are about the unpredictable human moment when leaders meet, the handshake that lasts, the pause that tells more than words, the abrupt exit that makes headlines. Sometimes real diplomacy happens in those unscripted seconds. Sometimes the meeting produces little but a photograph. In either case, the decision to invite is not merely a scheduling matter. It is a choice about how a society wants to conduct itself in a world where power, law, and public opinion intersect. You can have everything, a line that suggests generosity, perhaps, or confidence. In diplomatic practice, generosity without guardrails can be expensive. Confidence without counsel can be reckless. The coming months will show whether this invitation is the start of a carefully managed push to use every possible channel to prevent a wider war, or whether it becomes an episode of contested symbolism that leaves allies and opponents alike trying to read the United States' true direction. The answer will matter not just for a single summit in Miami, but for how the rules of the international order are written, enforced, and sometimes rewritten.